The sun was setting over Chicago, painting the sky in orange hues that reflected off the glass windows of the judicial district buildings. Judge Andrew Vance, a distinguished 45-year-old man with a serene gaze, was storing his last documents in his black leather briefcase. It had been a particularly intense day, with 3 complex cases that had tested his judicial temperament and wisdom. "Judge, do you need me to call your driver?" asked Sarah, his trusted assistant of 8 years. "That won't be necessary, Sarah. I prefer to drive myself today. I need that time alone to reflect," Andrew replied, while adjusting his tie in his office mirror. What Andrew didn't mention was that this day marked the 10th anniversary of his appointment as judge, a decade dedicated to delivering justice, maintaining the balance in a city where inequalities and prejudices remained daily bread. He felt proud of his trajectory, but was also aware that much remained to be done. As he descended to the underground parking garage, his phone vibrated. It was a message from his wife, Emily. "Don't forget to pick up the cake for the celebration dinner. We're waiting for you." A smile crossed his face. Emily always thought of everything, and despite his long work days, she managed to keep the family united. The judge's black BMW glided smoothly through the streets of downtown Chicago. The city lights were beginning to turn on, and traffic, though present, flowed relatively normally. Andrew took his usual route home, the one that crossed through Lincoln Park, where flowering trees formed canopies over the avenues. However, as he turned a corner, the blue and red lights of several police patrol cars interrupted his peaceful journey. A police checkpoint. Something quite common in the city, Andrew thought as he slowed down. What he didn't expect was to find an exclusively female group of officers, all fair-skinned, led by a woman with a severe expression whom he would later know as Officer Morrison. "Vehicle registration and driver's license," Morrison ordered with a sharp tone that caught Andrew's attention. It wasn't the usual treatment he received, but he decided to stay calm and cooperate. While searching for the documents in his glove compartment, he noticed the officers exchanging glances among themselves, whispering comments he couldn't quite hear. The tension in the air was palpable, and something inside warned him this wouldn't be a routine check. "Coming from work?" Morrison asked, examining his suit with scrutinizing eyes. "Yes, officer, I'm coming from the courthouse," Andrew replied serenely. "From the courthouse?" "As a janitor." The deliberately provocative comment was accompanied by contained laughter from the other officers. Andrew felt indignation rising within him, but years of experience in court had taught him to maintain composure in tense situations. "I'm a judge of the Superior Court," he responded with dignity. Morrison's mocking smile transformed into a skeptical grimace. "A judge? I'll need to see additional identification to verify that." While Andrew searched for his judicial credentials, he didn't notice that a young local reporter, Chris Reynolds, had begun photographing the scene from across the street. The reporter, returning from covering another event, immediately recognized the respected Judge Vance and knew something wasn't right about this situation. Officer Morrison examined the judicial credential with barely disguised disdain. "This could be fake. There are lots of forged IDs circulating lately. I assure you it's authentic, officer. You can verify it with headquarters or by calling the courthouse directly," suggested Andrew, maintaining a professional tone despite growing frustration. At that moment, one of the younger officers in the group, Officer Taylor, began searching the vehicle's interior without authorization or warrant. "Chief, look at this," she exclaimed, pulling a small object from the glove compartment. It was an antique pocket watch, a family heirloom Andrew had inherited from his father, also a judge. However, in the officer's hands, the object suddenly became cause for suspicion. "Can you explain where this item came from?" demanded Morrison, holding the watch as if it were evidence of some crime. "It's a family inheritance, officer. It belonged to my father. A piece like this must be worth quite a bit of money. Do you have proof of ownership?" The situation was beginning to attract passers-by's attention, among them Bob Wilson, a local business owner who frequented the courthouse and knew Judge Vance well, approached intending to intervene. "Excuse me, officers, but you're making a mistake. This gentleman is Judge Vance. I know him personally," Bob tried to explain. "Sir, step back, or we'll have to detain you for obstructing a police procedure," Morrison threatened. while her companions formed a barrier between the onlookers and the scene. Andrew, taking advantage of a moment of distraction, managed to discreetly send a message to his friend and colleague, Jules attorney Daniel Graham. Police checkpoint on Lakeshore Drive. Irregular situation. Need urgent legal backup. The message was received by Daniel while having dinner with his family. Without hesitation, he excused himself from his loved ones and headed to the indicated location. He knew Andrew well enough to know that if he was asking for help, the situation must be serious. Meanwhile, the group of officers had begun conducting an exhaustive inspection of the vehicle, clearly exceeding their authority. The crowd of spectators grew, and disapproving murmurs became increasingly audible. Why are they treating him like this? This is abuse. Someone should record this, could be heard among the people. Chris Reynolds and the reporter continued documenting everything discreetly, capturing every detail of what was becoming a clear case of abuse of authority. His photographs would later show the judge's contained expression, the officer's hostile attitude, and the growing indignation of witnesses. Tension reached its peak when Morrison, visibly annoyed by the attention the situation was receiving, decided to escalate the confrontation. "Sir, you're showing a resistant attitude toward authority. If you don't fully cooperate, I'll have to proceed with your arrest." "Officer, with all due respect, I am cooperating fully. However, I must point out that this procedure is exceeding the limits of a routine check," responded Andrew, maintaining his calm but firm in his position. At that precise moment, attorney Daniel Graham arrived at the scene. His imposing presence and decisive manner of approaching caused an immediate change in the situation's dynamics. "Good evening, officers. I'm attorney Daniel Graham, legal representative of Judge Andrew Vance. Could you explain the reason for this prolonged detention?" Daniel's arrival marked a turning point in the situation. However, none of those present knew that this incident would be just the beginning of a series of events that would shake the foundations of Chicago's judicial and police system, revealing deep-rooted prejudices and the urgent need for profound institutional change. The presence of attorney Daniel Graham visibly altered Officer Morrison's behavior. Her expression of unshakable authority began showing the first cracks of concern, though she struggled to maintain control of the situation. "This is a routine procedure, Counselor," Morrison responded, trying to downplay the incident. "We found suspicious elements during the inspection." Daniel, with years of experience in police abuse cases, immediately recognized the patterns of discrimination. "Could you specify what these suspicious elements are? Because as far as I can see, the only suspicious thing here is how this operation is being conducted." While the exchange continued, one of the youngest officers in the group, Officer Amy Sullivan, began showing signs of discomfort. Her eyes moved nervously between her colleagues and Judge Vance, as if fighting an internal battle between duty and conscience. At that moment, reporter Chris Reynolds got close enough to capture a revealing conversation between two officers. "Isn't this the same Morrison who was reported last month?" one of them whispered. "Yeah." But the case was dismissed as always. The other responded with a complicit smile. Chris quickly made a mental note. This information could be crucial for the story taking shape in his mind. Meanwhile, Daniel had taken out his phone and was openly recording the procedure. "For legal purposes," he explained when Morrison tried to stop him. "As an officer of the law, you must know we have the right to document interactions with police." The crowd of spectators had grown considerably. Among them, an elderly woman approached Chris and whispered, "That Officer Morrison. 3 months ago she detained my son the same way, just because of his appearance, but nobody believed us." The tension in the air was palpable when suddenly Officer Sullivan stepped forward. "Chief, I think we should—" Silence. "Sullivan?" Morrison cut her off sharply, but it was too late. The doubt in her subordinate's voice had been noticed by everyone present. Andrew, who had maintained admirable calm until then, decided it was time to reveal his ace in the hole. "Officer Morrison, I think you should know that my vehicle is equipped with security cameras. This entire incident has been recorded from the moment you stopped me." The color drained from Morrison's face. Her colleagues' looks turned uneasy, and Officer Sullivan took another step back, physically distancing herself from the group. Daniel seized the moment of uncertainty. I suggest you end this irregular procedure. Unless, of course, you prefer we take this matter directly to internal affairs. The crowd, which had been holding its breath, began murmuring with renewed intensity. Several cell phones were pointed at the scene, streaming live on social media. Morrison, cornered but still resistant, made one last attempt to maintain her authority. This isn't over. I'll file a report. Of course it's not over, Andrew interrupted, speaking for the first time in several minutes. His voice, though calm, carried the weight of his judicial authority. But not in the way you think, Officer Morrison. This incident has exposed a systemic problem that needs to be addressed. At that precise moment, an additional patrol car approached the scene. From it descended Captain Rodriguez, Morrison's immediate superior, who had been alerted by multiple calls received at headquarters about the incident. "What's going on here?" demanded the captain, observing with concern the scene before him. The crowd of spectators, phones recording, the prestigious Judge Vance and his attorney, and his officers clearly in a compromising position. Before Morrison could respond, Officer Sullivan stepped forward. "Sir, I need to report irregular conduct in this procedure." The silence that followed was deafening. Officer Morrison looked at her subordinate with a mixture of disbelief and fury, while the rest of the officers exchanged nervous glances. "Captain," Daniel intervened, "I suggest we continue this discussion in a more formal setting. We have substantial evidence of discrimination and abuse of authority that needs to be reviewed." Captain Rodriguez, aware that the situation had become a potential media disaster, nodded gravely. "Officer Morrison, you and your team report immediately to the precinct. Judge Vance and I deeply regret this incident." As the crowd began to disperse, Chris Reynolds discreetly approached Officer Sullivan and handed her his card. "If you're willing to talk, your testimony could be crucial." The young officer took the card with trembling hands, aware that her decision to speak up had marked a point of no return in her career. Andrew, observing the scene, understood that tonight's incident was more than a simple case of discrimination. It was an opportunity to push for real change in the system. While Daniel coordinated the next legal steps with Captain Rodriguez, the judge took out his phone and dialed a number. "Emily, I'll be late getting home." "No, don't worry, I'm fine. But I think I just found the cause I've been looking for all these years." The next morning dawned with a headline that shook Chicago: "Judge victim of police discrimination, justice on trial." Chris Reynolds' article, accompanied by damning photographs, occupied the front page of the Metropolitan Truth. In his courthouse office, Andrew contemplated the newspaper on his desk, while Daniel paced back and forth, checking messages on his phone. "Social media is on fire," Daniel reported. "The videos have gone viral. There are already protesters gathering in front of the precinct, demanding Morrison's dismissal." "Have you heard from Officer Sullivan?" asked Andrew, remembering the crucial moment when the young officer decided to break ranks. "Yes, and it's not good. She's receiving pressure from her colleagues. They're treating her like a traitor." The office door opened, and Sarah, Andrew's assistant, rushed in. "Judge, Officer Sullivan is here. She says it's urgent." Amy Sullivan entered, visibly distressed. Her uniform, normally impeccable, showed signs of a sleepless night. "Judge Vance, I need your help. This morning I found this in my locker." She extended a note with letters cut from newspapers that read, "Rats who talk end up dead." Andrew and Daniel exchanged worried looks. The situation was escalating faster than anticipated. "We need protection for Officer Sullivan," declared Andrew. "Daniel, contact the anti-corruption prosecutor. This isn't just discrimination anymore. We're dealing with witness intimidation." At that moment, Chris Reynolds' phone rang. It was one of his contacts at the precinct. "Chris, you need to see this. I found records of previous complaints against Morrison, all mysteriously dismissed. And there's more. She has connections with high-ranking police officials." The reporter began connecting the dots. The dismissed complaints of the political connections, the intimidation. This was bigger than a simple case of discrimination. Meanwhile, at the precinct, Officer Morrison was having a tense meeting with Captain Rodriguez. "Do you have any idea what mess you've gotten us into?" growled the captain. "The press, social media, the protests." "Sir, I can handle it." Morrison responded with confidence she didn't feel. "I have information that could be useful in calming the waters." "What kind of information?" "About certain judicial decisions by Judge Vance. Decisions that might not withstand detailed scrutiny." The captain stared at her intently. "Are you suggesting we blackmail a judge?" "I'm just saying everyone has something to lose in this situation." What neither of them knew was that their conversation was being recorded by Officer Thompson, who had begun questioning her loyalty to Morrison after the previous night's events. At the courthouse, Andrew received an unexpected call. It was Emily, his wife. "Andrew, I just received an anonymous call. They say they have information about your past that could ruin your career. What are they talking about?" The judge felt a chill. He knew exactly what they were referring to. Years ago, at the start of his career, he had made a controversial decision in a case involving a corrupt politician. He had followed the law to the letter, but the circumstances were complex and easily manipulable against him. "Emily, don't worry. We knew this could get ugly, but I'm not backing down." Daniel, who had overheard the conversation, approached his friend. "Andrew, this is turning into a dirty war. Are you sure you want to continue?" "More than ever," responded the judge. "If I back down now, I'll be confirming that the system is irredeemably corrupt. We can't let fear paralyze us." At that moment, Officer Sullivan received a text message from an unknown number. "I have evidence against Morrison. Meet at the Riverside Mall parking garage, 8 p.m. "Could be a trap," warned Daniel when Amy showed them the message. "Or it could be our chance to expose the whole truth," responded Andrew. "But you won't go alone, Amy. We'll organize a discreet operation." Meanwhile, Chris Reynolds had started receiving messages from other officers willing to talk. The story was growing, revealing a systematic pattern of discrimination and cover-ups that extended beyond this incident. The afternoon progressed, and tension in the city was palpable. Groups of protesters had gathered both in front of the courthouse and the precinct. Social media was boiling with hashtags like "Justice for All" and "No More Discrimination." In his office, Andrew watched the crowd gathered below through his window. His phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. "Last chance to back off. Judge Vance, not all traffic accidents are accidental." The Riverside Mall parking garage was unusually empty for 7:45 p.m. Officer Sullivan, dressed in civilian clothes, waited in her car while Daniel and a discreet private security team, hired by Andrew, watched from different strategic points. "Movement at the north entrance," Daniel reported through the intercom. "Black Ford. No plates." Amy's heart was pounding when a figure emerged from the vehicle. It was Officer Thompson, her colleague from the force. She carried a thick folder under her arm and kept looking over her shoulder. "Amy," Thompson whispered as she approached, "what I have here could destroy not just Morrison, but half the police leadership." Meanwhile, in Captain Rodriguez's office, Morrison was pounding the desk in frustration. Ty Thompson isn't answering her phone. "What did she have?" asked the captain, his face a mask of concern. "Access to the old files. She was in charge of processing the complaints against us." In the parking garage, Thompson began revealing years of systematic corruption, covered-up discrimination cases, bribes, threats, all meticulously documented. "Why decide to speak now?" asked Amy. "Because I saw something in Judge Vance's eyes that night. I saw real integrity, not just empty words. And I'm tired, Amy, tired of being part of the problem." Suddenly, the parking garage lights went out. Daniel shouted through the intercom, "Hostile movement, get out of there." 3 unmarked vehicles entered the parking garage from different directions. Amy and Thompson ran toward the emergency exit, but a shot rang out in the darkness. Thompson fell, the folder scattering documents across the floor. "Thompson!" Amy cried, turning back for her colleague. "Take the documents, go!" Thompson gasped, clutching her wounded shoulder. Daniel's security team intervened, exchanging gunfire with the attackers while Amy frantically gathered the documents. In the confusion, she managed to identify one of the attackers. It was Captain Rodriguez's nephew, known for doing the department's dirty work. At the courthouse, Andrew received an urgent call from Chris Reynolds. "Judge, I just received information from an anonymous source. The operation against you comes from the top, very high up. I found connections between Morrison and the police commissioner. Commissioner Richardson, are you sure? Completely. Apparently, Morrison wasn't just executing discrimination orders, she was also helping cover up the commissioner's irregular operations. Andrew's mind worked at full speed. Richardson had been recently appointed and presented himself as a reformer of the system. His fall would cause a political earthquake. At the hospital where Thompson was taken, Amy carefully guarded the documents while Daniel organized additional protection. Amy's phone rang. It was Morrison. "You can still choose the right side, Sullivan. Do you really want to end up like Thompson?" "I already chose, Morrison, the side of truth." "Truth?" Morrison scoffed. "Doesn't pay the bills or protect your family." Amy hung up, but Morrison's words haunted her. Had she put her family in danger? Meanwhile, Emily, Andrew's wife, received an unexpected visit at her medical practice. "Dr. Vance," Commissioner Richardson smiled, "can we talk about your husband?" "Commissioner, if you're here to threaten me..." No, I'm here to offer a solution that benefits everyone. Your husband is an intelligent man. He must understand there are battles not worth fighting." "My husband also understands there are principles that aren't negotiable," Emily responded, maintaining her calm while discreetly activating her phone's recorder. At the precinct, a rookie officer found something disturbing while reviewing security cameras from the original incident. A pattern. Morrison and her team had been specifically selecting people of certain profiles for their routine checks. The officer, torn between duty and safety, finally decided to anonymously send the footage to Chris Reynolds. The night progressed, and in different parts of the city, the pieces of the puzzle began fitting together. What had started as a discrimination incident had become the tip of the iceberg of a conspiracy, threatening to expose years of institutionalized corruption. The emergency room at General Hospital buzzed with activity when Judge Vance arrived to see Thompson. In the room, guarded by 2 private security guards, the wounded officer tried to sit up in bed. "Judge," Thompson whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't speak up earlier. I have to tell you something about Commissioner Richardson." Before she could continue, the hospital lights flickered and went completely out. The emergency generators took several seconds to activate, time enough for chaos to break loose. In the confusion, a figure dressed as a nurse tried to enter the room, but Daniel, who had arrived moments earlier, intercepted them. In the struggle, a syringe fell to the floor. "Toxicology analysis, quick!" Andrew shouted to the doctors who had rushed to the commotion. Meanwhile, at the Metropolitan Truth newsroom, Chris Reynolds worked frantically, connecting dots with the new information received. On his wall, a connection map revealed an intricate web of corruption extending from the streets to the highest levels of government. His phone rang. It was a message from Emily. "I have a recording of Commissioner Richardson. He's admitting everything." Chris felt a journalistic thrill, but also concern. "Dr. Vance, you need immediate protection. This is bigger than we thought." At the precinct, Officer Morrison received an urgent call from Commissioner Richardson. "Everything's falling apart!" Richardson shouted. "Thompson has documents that implicate us in Operation Cleanup." Operation Cleanup, the code name for a systematic program of discrimination and social control they had been executing for years. "Sir, I can fix this," Morrison responded, though her voice betrayed her uncertainty. "You've done enough," Richardson cut her off. "Prepare to be the scapegoat." The call ended, leaving Morrison in deafening silence. After a few moments, she made a decision. She dialed Amy Sullivan's number. "Amy, we need to talk. I have something that might interest you." At the hospital, the toxicology results confirmed everyone's fears. The syringe contained a lethal substance. The fake nurse, under interrogation, revealed himself to be a former police officer with connections to Commissioner Richardson's inner circle. Emily arrived at the hospital escorted by the security team. She played the recording of her conversation with Richardson for Andrew and Daniel. "And if your husband insists on moving forward, I'll make sure you both lose much more than your careers." "This is the proof we needed," said Daniel, "but it also puts us in greater danger." At that moment, Amy Sullivan burst into the room. "Morrison wants to talk, says she has evidence against Richardson, but wants immunity." Andrew rubbed his temples, considering the implications. Can we trust her? No, Amy responded, but she's desperate, and desperation makes people tell the truth. While they discussed their options, Chris Reynolds worked against the clock on his final article. The pieces fit together: systematic discrimination, bribes, threats, all part of a larger plan to maintain social control through fear and prejudice. The reporter received an encrypted file from his contact at the precinct. They were the complete records of Operation Cleanup. Names, dates, victims, everything documented with the cold efficiency of corrupt bureaucracy. At the hospital, Thompson finally completed her revelation. Commissioner Richardson didn't just authorize discrimination, he demanded it. It was part of a larger plan to keep certain areas of the city clean for luxury real estate developments. Forced gentrification through police harassment, muttered Andrew, the implications hitting him hard. Daniel received a call from one of his contacts in the prosecutor's office. They have orders from above to close the investigation. Richardson is pulling his strings. Then we need to act now, Andrew decided. Chris needs to publish everything before they can cover it up. Midnight approached when Andrew, Emily, Daniel, and Amy gathered in a private hospital room to meet with Morrison. The former officer entered, escorted by 2 security guards, her usual arrogance replaced by an expression of defeat. "Before you start," Morrison said, "I want you to see this." She pulled a USB drive from her pocket. "These are videos from weekly meetings with Richardson. He specifically ordered who we should control and in which areas." Chris Reynolds, connected through a secure video call, took notes frantically. "Why did you decide to keep this evidence?" "Life insurance," Morrison responded with a bitter smile. "In this business, you learn to protect yourself." While they reviewed the files, Emily received an urgent message from her hospital. Someone had attempted to access Andrew's private medical records. "They're looking for something to discredit you," warned Emily. "Any medical condition, medication, anything they can use against you." Daniel suddenly straightened up. "Wait, what if that was the real reason for the police checkpoint? What if they knew Judge Vance would take that route that day?" Morrison nodded slowly. Richardson knew the judge was investigating cases of police discrimination. The order was clear: find something, anything, to keep him quiet. At that moment, Thompson, from her hospital bed, asked to speak with Andrew privately. "Judge, there's more," she whispered. "Operation Cleanup wasn't just about gentrification. They were building a case against you for months. Surveillance, tracking, everything. Why me specifically? Because you were close to discovering something bigger. The real estate developments, they're just a front for money laundering operations." In the newsroom, Chris received an anonymous call. "Look at the building permits from the last 2 years. They all connect to shell companies linked to Richardson." The reporter began unraveling a web of corruption that extended far beyond police discrimination. Every new luxury development in the city was a piece in an elaborate money laundering scheme. Amy Sullivan, reviewing Thompson's documents, found something disturbing. Her own name on a list of expendable officers. "They were going to eliminate us," she realized in horror. "All of us who didn't blindly follow orders." Andrew made a decision. "Chris, we need to publish everything. Now." "Judge," Morrison intervened, "if we do this, there's no going back. Richardson has connections everywhere." "That's exactly why it must be done," Andrew responded. "The system only changes when truth comes to light." Daniel received an urgent call from his contacts in the prosecutor's office. They were preparing an arrest warrant for Andrew based on fabricated accusations. "We have less than an hour," warned Daniel. "Once the warrant is signed, then we need to beat them to it," Emily decided. She took out her phone and began live streaming on social media, telling the whole story. While Emily streamed, Chris published his investigation online, and Amy coordinated with other honest officers to secure crucial evidence. Suddenly, the hospital lights flickered again. "Not a coincidence," muttered Daniel, mobilizing the security team. In the hospital parking lot, a group of armed men descended from several dark vehicles, but this time, they weren't alone. Dozens of citizens, alerted by Emily's broadcast, began arriving at the hospital. "The people are with you." "Judge Vance," someone shouted from the crowd. The story had become something bigger than a case of police discrimination. It had transformed into a citizens' movement for transparency and justice. Dawn in Chicago became a hotbed of activity as social media exploded with Emily's broadcast and Chris's article. Operation Cleanup and Justice Vance became trending topics within minutes. At the hospital, the situation grew increasingly tense. The armed men in the parking lot found themselves faced not only with citizens but also with journalists who began arriving, alerted by their colleagues. "Sir," one of the thugs called Richardson, "there are too many witnesses. We can't proceed." Commissioner Richardson, in his office, watched as his empire began to crumble. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. Politicians, businessmen, all wanting to distance themselves from the scandal. Meanwhile, in the hospital room, Morrison revealed more details. The discriminatory police checks were just the tip of the iceberg. Every person intimidated, every family forced to move, every business closed. It was all part of a master plan to clean specific areas of the city. Amy Sullivan, reviewing the documents, found something revealing. "Look at this. There's a pattern in the target zones. They all coincide with future real estate projects by Richardson Group." "Richardson Group," muttered Daniel. "The company is in the commissioner's wife's name." Chris, still connected via video call, typed frantically, "I have more." The funds for these developments, they come from offshore accounts linked to criminal organizations. Suddenly, Emily received an anonymous message with a video. It was a secret meeting between Richardson and several businessmen, openly discussing how to clean certain areas of undesirable elements. "This is pure dynamite," said Chris. "With this, not just Richardson falls, the entire corrupt system falls." At that moment, Thompson, from her bed, made a shocking revelation. "The checkpoint on Judge Vance, it wasn't a coincidence. They found something in your recent investigations, something about a case from 10 years ago." Andrew froze. He knew exactly which case she was referring to. "The Madison case," he said quietly. "Richardson's first major real estate development." "What does that case have to do with this?" asked Emily. "Back then, as a rookie judge, I received what seemed like a simple eminent domain case. But something in the documents didn't add up. I could never prove it. But the documents were forged," completed Morrison. "Richardson built his empire with that development. If anyone connected the dots." The revelation was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway. A group of internal affairs officers, led by a veteran investigator, Detective Rachel Barnes, entered the hospital. "Judge Vance," Detective Barnes greeted. "We're here for Officer Morrison and to protect you. The federal prosecutor's office has just opened a formal investigation into Operation Cleanup." In the streets, people began gathering not only in front of the hospital, but also in front of the police department headquarters and Richardson Group offices. Chris received another leak, internal emails from Richardson's company, detailing payments to officers and officials to keep the scheme running. "This is bigger than Chicago," said Daniel, reviewing the documents. "There are connections to similar developments in other cities across the country." Emily continued her live stream. "And now with over 500,000 viewers, the people have a right to know the truth," she declared. "This isn't just the story of a discriminatory police stop. It's the story of how power and greed can corrupt an entire system." The dawn found Chicago in a state of shock. The main avenues filled with peaceful protesters, while social media burned with new revelations every minute. At the hospital, Detective Barnes coordinated with Daniel and Amy to protect key witnesses. "We need to keep Thompson and Morrison safe. Their testimonies are crucial." Andrew received an unexpected call. It was the Chief Justice of the Superior Court. "Vance, the governor is calling an emergency session. This has reached federal levels." Meanwhile, Chris Reynolds had discovered something disturbing in the leaked documents. Operation Cleanup had 3 phases, he explained through the video call. The first was police intimidation. The second, economic pressure on local businesses. The third was supposed to start next week. "What was the third phase?" asked Emily, still streaming. "Mass evictions," responded Morrison from her corner. "They were going to use falsified property documents to expel entire families from their homes. Thousands of people affected." At that moment, Amy Sullivan received a message from her former force colleagues. Several officers were willing to testify about the discriminatory orders they had received. "The wall of silence is breaking," observed Daniel. "The honest cops are tired of being complicit." Thompson, stronger after the critical first hours, asked for her laptop. "I need to show you something. For years, I kept a secret record. Names, dates, transactions." On the screen appeared a meticulously organized database. Every incident of discrimination, every bribe, every threat. "Why did you keep all this?" asked Andrew. "Because someone had to keep the truth alive," Thompson responded. "I was hoping someday someone like you would appear, someone with the courage to face the system." In the streets, the situation took an unexpected turn. Business owners and residents from affected areas began sharing their own stories of intimidation and harassment. Chris received an anonymous video. It showed Richardson in a secret meeting with foreign real estate developers, promising clean land for their investments. "The vocabulary they use," observed Emily. "They talk about people as if they were obstacles to be removed." "Dehumanization," nodded Andrew. "The first step in justifying injustice." Detective Barnes received an urgent call. They had found a warehouse full of documents related to Operation Cleanup. "They tried to burn it," she reported, "but we got there in time." At that moment, Daniel noticed something in Thompson's documents, a list of judges and officials who had been pressured or bribed to cooperate with the scheme. "Some names are surprising," he muttered. "Corruption doesn't discriminate," responded Andrew. "It affects all levels." Emily continued her broadcast, now alternating between interviews with affected residents and updates on the investigations. "People need to see they're not alone," she explained, "that their stories matter." Suddenly, Amy received an alert. Groups of officers were voluntarily presenting themselves to Internal Affairs, ready to confess their participation in Operation Cleanup. "It's like a domino effect," observed Chris. "Once the truth starts coming out." The morning advanced while revelations continued shaking Chicago's foundations. In the governor's office, an emergency meeting was taking place with palpable tension. "You have to stop this," demanded Richardson via video conference, his face distorted. "It's a conspiracy to destabilize the government." But it was too late. Social media was boiling with testimonies from citizens sharing their own experiences of police discrimination. "I was a victim" too became a national trending topic. At the hospital, Andrew received a call that would change the course of events. It was an old colleague from the court, Judge Matthews. "Vance, I have to confess something. 10 years ago, in the Madison case, they pressured me to assign it to you." "What? Why?" "You were new, idealistic. They thought they could easily manipulate you. When you stood firm, they started building a file against you." Chris, still connected, typed frantically. "This explains a lot. The police checkpoint wasn't the beginning. It was the last resort." Emily, without stopping her broadcast, noticed a pattern in the incoming testimonies. All the victims have something in common. They dared to challenge Richardson's plans in some way. At that moment, Thompson made a shocking revelation from her hospital bed. Operation Cleanup had another name in its beginnings, Project Phoenix. The idea was to burn certain areas of the city so they could rise again as luxury developments. Morrison, who had been unusually quiet, added, "Richardson sold us the idea as a way to improve the city. Made us believe we were part of something bigger." Amy Sullivan received an urgent message from her contacts in the force. An extraordinary assembly of officers was being organized. "They're demanding a complete department cleanup," she reported. "The lower and middle ranks are tired of being pawns in this dirty game." Daniel, meanwhile, coordinated with Detective Barnes to protect new witnesses emerging every hour. "It's like we've uncapped a dam," he observed. "Try all the secrets are coming to light." Suddenly, Emily received an anonymous document. It was Project Phoenix's original plan, dated 5 years ago. "This is chilling," she said as she read it. They had mapped the entire city, marking priority zones for urban renewal. "Urban renewal?" Morrison scoffed. "That's what they called it in official documents. In reality, it was social cleansing." Chris interrupted with new information. "I just received confirmation. The Federal Bureau is taking over the case. This is no longer just a local matter. In the streets, the demonstration had grown exponentially. Citizens from all social strata united in a single voice against injustice. "The people have awakened," murmured Andrew, observing from the hospital window. Thompson, from her bed, smiled weakly. "You know what's most ironic? Judge, Richardson and his accomplices thought they could silence the city, but the city has its own voice." At that moment, Detective Barnes received a call that froze everyone's blood. They had found Richardson. The news hit like a bomb in the hospital room. Richardson had been found at a private hangar, attempting to flee the country. Detective Barnes coordinated his arrest while everyone followed the events in real time. "He had fake documents and several million in cash," reported the detective. "He was prepared to run." But the most shocking thing was what they found in his briefcase, a blacklist with names of people who needed to be neutralized. Judge Vance's name was at the top of the list. It wasn't just about property and money, reflected Andrew. It was about power and absolute control. Emily, who had maintained her broadcast for hours, captured the exact moment when Richardson was escorted by federal agents. His face, once arrogant, now showed the weight of his actions. Chris Reynolds, working tirelessly, published his final article, "The Fall of the Discrimination Empire." In it, he detailed how a system designed to protect citizens had become a tool of oppression and greed. Morrison, observing everything from her corner, finally broke her silence with a devastating confession. "The real tragedy is that many of us truly believed we were doing the right thing. Richardson convinced us that discrimination was necessary for the city's progress." Amy Sullivan, who had been receiving constant updates from her police colleagues, shared hopeful news. "They're forming a police reform commission. Officers from all ranks want to participate in rebuilding the department." Thompson, stronger after her recovery, added, "The real cleanup begins now. Not the one Richardson planned, but the cleanup of corruption and prejudice from our institutions." Daniel received a call from the Chief Justice. They were organizing a special session to review all cases affected by Operation Cleanup. "They're going to need your experience, Andrew," said Daniel. "You're the symbol of this fight." "No," corrected Andrew. "And the symbol is every citizen who dared to raise their voice, every officer who chose truth over blind loyalty, every witness who risked everything for justice." Emily, ending her historic broadcast, captured the moment when thousands of citizens lit candles in front of the hospital, creating a sea of light in the darkness. "You know what's most beautiful?" she said. "Emotional. People aren't afraid anymore." Detective Barnes returned with a final update. Along with Richardson, dozens of corrupt officials were being arrested across the city. "It's the end of an era," she declared, "and the beginning of another." As the sun began to rise over Chicago, illuminating streets filled with celebrating citizens, Andrew reflected on the power of a single moment of injustice to trigger monumental change. "What happens now?" asked Amy. "So now," responded Andrew, "the real work begins, rebuilding trust, healing wounds, making sure justice is truly blind to prejudice, but not to human suffering." Thompson, from her bed, smiled. "And this time, we'll do it together. Police officers, judges, citizens, all united for a common cause." "The real Operation Cleanup," added Morrison with an ironic smile, "turned out to be the cleaning of our own consciences." As the city awakened to a new era, the case of the police checkpoint that started it all would become a symbol of hope and change, a reminder that justice, though sometimes slow, always finds its way when people unite for a just cause. Chris published his final update, "Chicago Reborn, From Prejudice to Justice." The story that began with a discriminatory police stop had transformed an entire city